Why decide to write a book titled Contagion Myth?
Through understanding the history of contagion, we understand really how we got to the present day. But then I had an experience that I would say changed my life.
What are your thoughts with COVID and coronavirus? Are you someone that trusts taking a vaccine, or there's no way in the world you're going to touch a vaccine?
All of the tests are meaningless. All of the numbers are meaningless. There is no possible way that COVID-19 is caused by this coronavirus.
How do I get sick? I can't give my germ to somebody else. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, that is not what I'm saying. What it proves is you can't give sickness to somebody else.
A little bit complicated, but I'm trying to up my intelligence, so keep going.
If you look at a cookbook from 1920, butter, lard, and eggs. Nobody had heart attacks.
I want to live a long time, Dr. Tom, okay? What foods do you absolutely avoid?
If it has a label, don't eat it.
Any linkage between vertigo and dizziness and 5G towers being put up in different places?
It seems a little crazy to keep doing that over and over again and expect that we're going to get away with it.
Testosterone replacement. What are your thoughts on that?
You're eating crappy food, your joints are deteriorating, your body is lowering the testosterone to keep you from hurting yourself.
Is there a natural Cialis or Viagra?
The Native Americans had a very good formula for this.
Where do I get some high quality buffalo balls?
I'm going to not have you make babies because you're too dumb to do that.
So my guest today is Dr. Tom Cowan, who he's written many different books in the past before, but he's got a new one coming out as well. In the past, he wrote a book called Human Heart and the Cosmic Heart. He also wrote Vaccine Autoimmunity, also Cancer and the New Biology of Water, and a new book that's coming out called Contagion Myth. He got his undergrad at Duke University in '77. Then he went to the Peace Corps for 2 years, then became a doctor going to Michigan State University. So with that being said, Dr. Tom Cowan, thank you so much for being a guest on Valuetainment.
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to talk to you and meet you.
Yes, feeling is mutual. So, you know, why decide to write a book titled Contagion Myth?
That's a good question, because I have been thinking about this subject probably for 35 years, and I was hoping not to write about it because it's so controversial, and I was hoping I was done writing controversial books, but it just became clear to me that what I was seeing was so unmatched up with what I was hearing in the scientific community that I felt compelled to really look at this subject and really educate myself, and what I found felt like it needed to be written about.
So what do you write about in there that others would consider controversial?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the real answer to that question would have to go through the history of what I found. And I hope we can talk about that, because I think through understanding the history of contagion, we understand really how we got to the present day. So if you're okay with that, I'd like to describe the history of how we got into this, what I would call mess.
So can I call you Tom during the interview? Are you
Yes,
comfortable?
absolutely.
So Tom, you know, I have 4 outcomes of this interview. 4 outcomes I have in this interview based on the research I did on you, on the topics I saw you talking about in interviews. One is heart, and the reason why I want to talk to you about heart, you've spoken about that a lot, and for someone who's in business and it's a very, very high pressure type of a situation, you always hear about stress and pressure linked to heart. So I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on that, since you've written about it and spoken about it. That doesn't have to be the first one. I'd like to talk to you about the germ theory and what we've been told over our lives, you know, how we get germs, whether it's respiratory or coughing, and be careful. And you have different point of view on that. So I'd want to hear that as well. And then vaccine and obviously contagion myth, and some of them have to do with each other. So I think it's probably very helpful for the viewer to get an idea about the 35 years of research that you were talking about that got you to where you are today to want to write that book, Contagion Myth. So if you'd like to take the lead on that, that'd be great.
So as far as my background, so I go to Duke, and I had the feeling that I should be a doctor, but sort of didn't like the whole idea. I didn't like a lot of things that I saw. And so when I graduated there, my idea was to try to do anything I could besides being a doctor. So I joined the Peace Corps and taught gardening. And interestingly, and I often say I may be the only person on earth who can say this, I'm living in a mud hut in Swaziland, and I was given the books about Weston Price and Rudolf Steiner and what they thought about nutrition and basically medicine. And it's as if a light went off to me saying the kind of doctor I didn't want to be was not the only kind of doctor there was. And that there were people who were linking food to health, and there were people linking other ways of doing medicine and other ways of seeing the human being, which I had no idea about. So then I go to medical school, and I wanted to be a family doctor. I joined a family practice residency. And then I was already, interested in natural healing and food, and I knew something about vaccines. But then I had, an experience that I would say in a way changed my life, which is about 2 months into my first year residency, I was in a clinic, and there was a child at their second DPT shot was severely injured to the point where I don't think they survived. And, that was shocking to all of us, because it was very clear the baby was perfectly fine when he went in, and then had this severe brain injury, which was to the DPT shot, which was actually happening a fair amount at the time. And I said to myself, I did not go into medicine to hurt babies. But really what I saw was that really disturbed me, besides the fact that we had just hurt a baby, was that the doctors essentially lied to the parents and said there was no way this could be a vaccine reaction, even though it was very clear that the package insert, which I showed them, said that this could be a vaccine reaction. The other thing they did, which was equally disturbing to me, is they didn't report this to anybody. And so essentially from a normal statistical point of view, the people who are collecting statistics, this never happened. And then I saw this over and over again, and I started to realize that the reporting system we have and the way we communicate to patients was just really flawed. This, of course, did not endear me to my teachers, and it became very clear after my year in residency, when I got my license, that I just couldn't be part of this, because I refused to vaccinate the children in our clinic. And then I ended up spending the last 37 years with a practice. A lot of it in the first 20 was based on seeing children, basically all of whom were unvaccinated, many of whom got all the typical childhood illnesses. And I essentially was tasked myself with how do I treat these children? Because none of my patients would vaccinate. I wouldn't vaccinate. I probably gave 7 tetanus shots in my entire career, and essentially regret every one of those, because I didn't know what I really needed to know about tetanus. And so I had to learn how to treat these children. What I found and there's very few doctors who have that experience. I mean, that is my background. Now, I can tell you that after 35 years, as far as I know, I never had one bad outcome from a so-called vaccinatable disease. I never lost a child to measles, chickenpox, whooping cough. I saw hundreds, maybe thousands of these, and everybody was fine. And the other thing I saw is very few of my patients actually had chronic disease. So I actually was not very good at treating asthma and eczema and ADD, because none of my patients had them. Now, I did get patients from other practices. They heard Tom is good at treating, chronic disease, and they were all vaccinated children, and they came to me for help with their asthma or eczema or ADD or whatever it was, but they weren't my patients originally. And so what I was seeing was 2 different groups of children. The one who were essentially perfectly healthy. I used to joke that I would sometimes, because I had 3 children at the time too, I would see these children and their parents at the playground, and they would say, oh, there's my doctor. And I would think to myself, wait a minute, I don't think I've seen this child in 3 years. And you know, we had a good time. How are you? Oh, I'm fine, you know, playing in the dirt. And that was my experience. Now, I think some people would say, I mean, that's sort of anecdotal, you know, that's not double-blind studies, but I had to learn how to practice medicine in that context. And so I developed a huge repertoire of what works, because I couldn't afford to be doing things that wouldn't work. And again, as far as I know, I've had no bad outcomes. Now I'm retired, so apparently I got through the whole thing, and that's my story.
So now let me ask you, while you're going through this, who was your inspiration? Because for me, when I see doctors who eventually get to your position where they look at the data, and the data says over the past 50 years, rates of autoimmunity and chronic disease have exploded. Currently, 1 in 2.5 American children has an allergy. 1 in 11 has asthma. 1 in 13 have severe food allergies, and 1 in 36 are autistic or have autism, right? You have, based on the interviews, I'm not in your world, I'm not a doctor, I'm not practicing, but I've interviewed many in your world, and I've interviewed a lot of people that eventually become, you know, questioning vaccine. Does it seem like there are two types of doctors, those that become rebellious and they end up questioning everything and say, I don't know if this is the right way of doing things, and those who just kind of follow the guidelines, follow the rules, follow everything they tell them to do, and it becomes a transactional type of a doctor? But those who push the envelope a little bit, they tend to have an inspiration. Something inspired them to do that. What was your source of inspiration?
You know, that's also a great question. My particular answer to that was, you know, so I was pretty young too. I was, you know, late 20s. And so what I did was try to seek out people who, you know, it's an interesting quote from Carrie Mullis, who we may talk about later, but that there must be some wise men out there who could guide me. And so I looked in homeopathy, I looked in herbal medicine, I looked in Chinese medicine, I looked in anthroposophical medicine. And, you know, a lot of those I would say I'm fluent in. You know, I know how to do homeopathy, I know how to do herbalism, I know how to do nutrition, I know how to do anthroposophical medicine. But frankly, my experience was none of them really worked. And it was very, you know, to some it may be disillusioning, but, you know, to me, it's like, I almost have no dog in the fight. Like, I'm not allied to conventional thinking, anthroposophical thinking, homeopathy, whatever. I have a child in front of me who's got chicken pox. I need them to be fine and go on their way and be, you know, normal. And I got to figure out how to do it. And however I do that, that's not going to hurt them. That's what I did. And so essentially, I had to come up with my own system of doing medicine. And that's what I did. And that's why I wrote books.
Your own system. When you did come out with your new systems, did it ever get you in trouble? Did you ever have any issues with the board? Did they ever come out and say, hey, Dr. Cowan, you can't be doing that? Did you have any kind of experiences like that with the board?
Yeah, a little bit, but that's just normal. I mean,
okay.
You know, that's just how it goes.
So in your world, that's normal. That's not a big deal.
No, I mean, that's what happens.
Very, okay, interesting. Keep in mind, not all of us are doctors and have the kind of experience that you have who have studied what you've studied. So for some of us, you know, in the financial industry or in the business industry, you mix things up or you come out with something creative. You have regulators that could come out and say, you can't sell a product like that. You can't say this. I'm curious to know how you are regulated by the guidelines that you have. So now let's go back to the book, Contagion Myth, which I asked you. I said, what was the purpose of writing this book? You said, you know, you kind of need to know my background to know why I wrote this book. Now that we know your background, what was your inspiration to want to write that book?
Basically, because I looked through the history of contagion. And if you would permit me, I'd love to share what I found out with your listeners.
Please.
So what are we talking about here? We're talking about that the normal observation that, you know, a certain person gets sick in a certain way, let's say a cold, or a flu, and then somebody else in their vicinity or their family or whatever gets sick in the same way. And one says something was passed between the first person and another person. And this is a very normal, clear observation. We've all had it. And in fact, interestingly, it was first described at least 2,000 years ago by the ancient Greeks. They said there's something that's passed between people. We don't know what it is. They thought the spirits or who knows what. They couldn't see anything. And then they thought there must be something contagious. And we go then for about 1,800 years without being able to find the agent. Now, I would point out that this sort of Western science, Western medicine, is not the only stream of thought going on in those 2,000 years, right? There's Chinese medicine, there's probably traditional Iranian medicine, there's Native American medicine, there's Ayurvedic medicine. These are very old, successful medical systems. And what you find is none of them thought diseases were contagious. None of them. There is no concept in Chinese medicine that something unseen passes from one person to another. And in no other system did that exist. Now, of course, that doesn't mean it's true. They could have all been wrong. But when I looked into it, I thought that was sort of interesting. So then we get to around the 1800s, and now we're really talking about 1850. And there was what I call the first eureka moment, right? So we're thinking one person is sick, another person gets sick, there must be something spread. And that observation is what's called epidemiological observation. Now, I just want to point out something here, that this contagion theory was applied to the following disease. There was a bunch of sailors who got sick, and one sailor after another got sick, and their teeth fell out, and then they went into heart failure and died. And this happened into thousands and thousands of people. And it was usually one ship after another. And for 100 years, they said this must be contagious. And then somebody ate a lime and the whole thing went away because it turns out it was scurvy. And the reason I point that out is epidemiological observations, like this person got sick and then somebody else got sick, is well accepted in medicine. That is not how we prove causation. And you hear this now all the time. Well, a lot of people in one place got sick, so it must be a virus. Well, they blew a bomb off in Hiroshima. A lot of people got sick and nobody thinks that was a virus. Or they'll say, if it spreads from one place to another, that proves it's a virus. So I'm sure you remember Chernobyl. There was a nuclear accident. A lot of people died. It started spreading into Eastern Europe and then Western Europe. A lot of people got sick. And as far as I can tell, that's no evidence that that was a virus. In other words, the idea that a lot of people in Iran or Turkey or Spain or the nursing home or the cruise ship or the whatever got sick, my Aunt Bessie went to a party. Those are epidemiological observations, the purpose of which is to generate theories which can be tested for causation, period. And I would agree 100% that we had enough evidence with contagion that we should investigate for an infectious cause or an unseen agent. Now, that's what Louis Pasteur famously did. He said, there's all these people, and in fact, what he used was the case of sheep and said, there's all these sheep getting sick, one sheep after another. Sometimes the people who were handling the sheep got sick. So there must be something that's passed. They then had invented the microscope. So the first eureka moment in history then is they could see this bacteria under the microscope. And they saw the bacteria in the sheep, and they saw it in the next sheep who got sick. End of story. That's what caused the sheep to get sick, called anthrax. But here's what happened then. Pasteur isolated the anthrax bacteria from the sheep, right? So he took them out, and he gave them to other sheep, and none of them got sick. None of the people got sick. Now, here's the way I think people should understand this. Imagine you have a cow and you don't feed the cow proper food, which is grass, right? You feed it cardboard and dead cow parts and, you know, and you soak it in glyphosate and tick poisons, etc. All that stuff comes out in the milk. Now, then somebody drinks the milk and gets sick. That's contagion, right? And then you look in the milk and you see a bacteria called Listeria. And you say, okay, that may be the causative agent. And then you look in the stool of the person and they also have Listeria. End of story. And so the Listeria, you drank Listeria, it made you sick. Now, unfortunately though, or maybe fortunately, there's another explanation for that, which is the cow was sick, the milk, the poisons went into the milk. The role of bacteria in nature is to biodegrade poisons, right? If you have a compost pile and you put dead squirrels in it, you'll get bacteria to eat the squirrels. If you have a pond and you put poisons in it, you get algae growth that eat the poisons. If you have a forest and you cut the trees down, the algae and the fungus and the bacteria eat the dead trees. That's called biology. That's called bioremediation. So how do you know that the Listeria isn't there to digest the poisons in the milk? So we have two very clear explanations for what may have happened, right? It's either the bacteria or it's the poison, and the bacteria are not causing anything. They're just helping you out by eating the poisons, as they do in nature. Now, what I tell people is this is what Pasteur and his colleagues did for 40 years, because there is a very simple way to sort this out. All you have to do is isolate the Listeria from the milk, right? You can't give them all the milk because then you don't know if the poison's in it. Isolate the Listeria, give that to a bunch of animals, see what happens. That's what they did for 40 years. And as far as I can tell from the medical literature, no animal or person gets sick.
Now,
So it must be the milk.
Yeah. So when I was looking at the difference between him and Dr. John Snow, and I'm sure you studied Dr. John Snow as well, where he had a different angle that he had. What was the difference between the two of them, between Dr. John Snow and Pasteur?
Yeah, I don't know who John Snow is. You mean Beauchamp?
Not Beauchamp. Dr. John Snow is also during the same time as 1850s, because I know Pasteur died 1895. During the same time, you know, Snow was linking everything to water. So I know you're specifically isolating water, milk right now because of pasteurization. And, you know, most of us just say pasteurization and we don't even know where it comes from. Some of us know it comes from the name Pasteur, but he was also talking about how a lot of the viruses were coming from water rather than somebody's breathing and coughing on you. That's how I got sick. It was the water.
No, I don't know this Snow, but the two main people then were Pasteur and Beauchamp. Beauchamp said it's not the bacteria and it's the terrain. Now, so essentially Pasteur and his colleagues tried for 40 years. And in fact, it's very interesting what happened then, because a German colleague named Robert Koch came up with very simple guidelines so that we would know whether a microorganism is causing a disease. And it's very simple and straightforward. They're called Koch's postulates, and they are the hallmark ever since of how we prove causation. And it's very simple. You take like 100 sheep or 100 people with the same disease, and you identify an organism that's the same in all of those 100 people, right? Here's a way to think about this. I came up with this last night. If you had a disease called swollen thumb syndrome, and so 100 people with swollen thumb, and you ask them, what happened to you? And they said, I don't know, somebody came along and bashed my thumb with a hammer, all 100 of them. Mm-hmm. So that turns out not proof. So you go to the next 100 people who don't have a swollen thumb, and you say, did any of you get bashed with a hammer? No, none of us. So that's postulate number 2. no people who are healthy have that organism, right? Because if they have it, then why didn't it make them sick? That's still not proof. Then he said, you have to take the organism from the sick people, isolate it, purify it, give it to the unhealthy people, and if they get sick, you prove causation. In other words, you take the hammer, bash 100 healthy people, and if they all get a swollen thumb, that's how human beings understand causation. Every human being would say, yes, I'm sure that the hammer is what causes them. And here's the trouble. There is not, Koch eventually said, these postulates don't work because there's not one case in the medical literature where they've proven the postulates. Not one. We've looked for 20 years. They say they do. They say they're still valid because they're common sense. I have reports even from this current episode. You know, we see epidemiology, somebody should do Koch's postulates. And then we have a report from this current situation, Koch's postulates were fulfilled. But the trouble is they never isolated an organism. They never made an animal sick, and they didn't do Koch's postulates. So that's how this got started. The next, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So the next step, so they failed to prove causation with any bacteria. Then they say, well, we have diseases now which we can't find a bacteria, right? But we know that must be an infection because it looks like it's contagious. So there must be something smaller than a bacteria. And the main disease was polio. So they looked in the dead brains and the spine. They looked for a bacteria. They couldn't find it. And so they said, there must be something smaller that's poisoning these children and these people. And they called it a virus. They didn't see a virus. They didn't know what they were looking for. They just said, there must be an infectious agent. And so then they said, okay, we're going to try to isolate this because they were still interested in these Koch's postulates. And so they put it through a filter. So they had filters that could filter out the bacteria in the cells. So they took children or people who had died of polio, they ground their brains up, put it through a filter, and then they took many, many different animals and they fed them this filtrate, and none of them got sick. None of them. And then they injected it subcutaneously into monkeys, hamsters, guinea pigs, you name it. None of them got sick. And then they said something very interesting, which is, it turns out there's no animal model for polio, which is a bizarre way to think. Because what they're saying is, we cannot make an animal sick with this virus filtrate that we can't see. And then in 1907, they did the experiment that proved that polio was contagious. They took a child who had paralysis, they took a piece of their spine, they ground it up in a blender, they filtered it, and they took 2 monkeys, I think they were rhesus monkeys, drilled holes in their brains, injected about 1/2 cup of this stuff into their brains. One of the monkeys died. One of the monkeys got paralyzed. They didn't do a control. In other words, they didn't just inject 1/2 cup of, water or something. So they don't know if the monkeys died because monkeys don't like having 1/2 cup of stuff injected right in their brain. Maybe they had a herniation. And they held the monkey up and they said, see, we proved polio is a transmissible disease. Now, I don't know about you, but I can see you frowning there. That doesn't sound like science to me.
So this entire study was based on 2 monkeys?
2 monkeys. The idea that polio was caused by a filterable thing we couldn't see, right? That's the studies. Now, so we go on from there. Then we go to 1918. So now they say, we've proven that there's something filterable, right? We got rid of the bacteria, we got rid of the cells. It could be a poison in there, could be arsenic, because it turns out that lead arsenic and DDT later caused the same symptoms as polio. And so they didn't know that, or maybe they did, but they ignored it. So they could even have had arsenic in the water. But anyways, because they didn't do a control, they have no idea, they can't find that out. So then they go to 1918 and about, 20 million people die from this Spanish flu. Highly contagious disease, right? And then, they see one person after another. And again, epidemiology is not how science proves causation. They only tell you, you should look here. So they did. The Boston Health Department did a study. It's referenced in the book. I can read you the conclusion if you want. They took about 100 people who had active symptoms of the Spanish flu, right? This is killing millions of people. They're snotty nose, coughing, everything. They got 100 volunteers and they divided them into 3 groups. One group, they spent 10 minutes breathing as hard as they could into their mouth, like that, right into their open mouth, 10 minutes.
Yep.
The other group, they spent 10 to 15 minutes coughing right in their face. And the other group, they actually took mucus out of their nose, right? Sucked the snot out of their nose and injected the snot right into the volunteer's nose. These are 100 people. The Boston Health Department does this. And you know how many of these volunteers got sick? 1. He got a runny nose, which I have the quote here. I could read it to you if you want. That says, it turns out that none of these ways are able to pass the transmissible agent from one person to another. Now, you can look at that and you could say that then they came to an interesting conclusion, Patrick. They said, it turns out we needed to be more aggressive in exposing the volunteers. And I thought to myself when I read that, like what, do a lung transplant or something? I mean, how can you be more aggressive than that? They sucked the snot out and injected it. And literally one person who they said, this is not the flu, they just got a runny nose because we injected some snot up their nose.
I mean, that's pretty intense. I just want to ask something, if you can hold that thought, because so 100 people were tested. This is the Spanish flu era.
1919.
1919, a third were asked to breathe 10 minutes open mouth into somebody else's face.
Open mouth.
Open mouth, strong into
like
their face.
Kissing, like kissing.
And then the other one was 10 or 15 minutes coughing into the face. And the last one was taking mucus out and injected it into the other person. And only 1 out of 100 got sick and they had a runny nose, not even sick.
Right.
So now here's my question for you. So then based on what you're saying is we cannot give our germ to somebody else. That's what you're saying, that's not possible. I can't give my germ to somebody else. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, that is not what I'm saying, because that doesn't prove you can't give germs. What it proves is you can't give sickness to somebody else.
Okay, then let me question you on that. If you can't get sickness.
There's a big difference there, Patrick, right?
Perfect. That's good to know. But I again, as a parent, this is a epiphany moment I'd love to have. So I have 3 kids. You know the saying, once one kid gets sick, everybody gets sick, right? Or, a parent gets sick when they have a baby and they have a 2-year-old kid in their house and then they get sick. Oh my gosh, I'm sick. Now my other son is sick. Now the mom is sick. And then at night when the mom sleeps with the dad, then the dad is sick, and that kind of goes. So that kind of, that argument kind of doesn't validate what happens in a lot of families, because when kids are around other kids, they tend to get sick. What would you say to that?
I would say the same thing I would say with every epidemiological observation, right? You're talking epidemiology there. One person gets sick and then another person gets sick. The same thing that happened with scurvy, the same thing that happened with Spanish flu, the same thing that happened with anthrax, the same thing that's happened with polio. Now, you have to take that observation and prove causation of a microbe. They did that over and over again, and they cannot prove Koch's postulates. They cannot prove causation. And all I would say, now, in the book, we do propose very specific reasons why those observations might happen, right? So I can explain exactly how you can understand that event.
I'd love to hear it. Go for it. I'm all ears.
But I think that comes later.
Okay.
Because we still have to, you have to stick with the argument, which is you have to take that observation, right? And then isolate a virus or a bacteria and prove that it can cause that disease. They've tried that for 150 years and they can't prove it. In fact, they can't demonstrate it. So, you know, we don't know if there's some sort of similar toxic exposure in your house, whether there's some sort of resonance phenomena, you know, like if you put 10 young women in a cabin for 6 months, they all start menstruating at the same time. You cannot, there's no virus there. So you can see physiological responses happen for lots of reasons. And in order to show that it's a microbe, you have to go through the steps. And they try over and over again. And I can keep going if you want and see how they try. And it turns out it's not the microbe. I also understand, Patrick, how bizarre this may seem to people because they get stuck on the epidemiology. They get stuck on this observation. This observation has been around for thousands of years. Same with scurvy, same with lots of things. It turns out we have a scientific method to prove it. We looked, and it turns out that's not the cause.
So what is?
Well, I just said, basically, these phenomena are elimination of toxins. So the trouble is we're skipping ahead here. And I would rather go back and see how the virus theory actually came about.
Here's what I'd like to challenge you to do. My challenge to you would be, try to explain it to a 6-year-old to understand who's not in your world and doesn't fully understand all the technical terms. Speak to me as if the average person is listening to this saying, you know what, doc, I really want to learn, but I don't understand how this is even possible if, you know, based on what I've experienced and what I've been told my entire life with visiting doctors, this is what I've seen. So if you can explain that and pack it into fairly a short amount of time to the best of your abilities, I'd love to hear that perspective from you.
So here's some facts about what we're calling a cold or a sickness, right? So essentially what happens is you're well, and then you usually get a fever or some other symptom. And then after that, what happens is you get a runny nose or mucus or cough or some sort of snot happens. And then what happens is you're better. And in fact, when we do the studies of what happens, for instance, with a child with chickenpox, right? So child with chickenpox, once they go through those stages, it turns out they're better for life, meaning they have less asthma, they have less eczema, they have less cancer, they have less osteoarthritis, they have less heart disease. All these are clearly in the medical literature. Now, here's another one, and I wrote a whole book on the cancer about this. It turns out that the most reliable way to treat cancer, and this was done with Coley's toxins, and it was done in the 1920s, is if somebody has cancer and they get a fever because they supposedly have an infection, then they have a much better outcome, and some of them are even cured of the cancer. In other words, this process that you're calling getting sick is simply a detoxification reaction. So in other words, you poison somebody with whatever. It could be emotional poison, it could be bad food, it could be toxins in the house, it could be that we're all exposed to glyphosate, it could be that we're all exposed to electromagnetic fields. All of these things distort our the gels in our cells, and then the body has to flush them out. It does this through making fever, making mucus. We call that infectious disease. And it turns out it's just a detoxification reaction. And the thing about it is when you treat it like that, you get people who have no bad outcomes and are better for life. That's what's happening. Now, there's something even very interesting about this, because we now know from very clear scientific studies that if you poison a cell or a tissue, it breaks down into little packages of genetic material, which are called exosomes, as a method of detoxification. In other words, it's similar to how a tree does. If you have a beetles eating a tree, they send out signals to tell all the other trees that there's been something happening that's noxious in their area. And then the other trees make a defensive response. Now, I'm aware that this may be more than a 6-year-old can do, but I'm trying my best to be as clear as I can here. So what's happening then is one child starts the process, and then they send out this signal to the other children, and even maybe the parents: you should make a defensive detoxification reaction. Unfortunately, we misinterpret that as sickness. We even misinterpret that the body makes these detoxification packages that are called exosomes, which are mistaken for viruses, and they're not contagious, they're not infectious, they're how the body communicates what's happened and detoxifies.
So can I ask you simple questions, okay?
Sure.
And simple answers. Let's see if we can pull this off. So, Doc, how do I get sick? Do I get sick through respiratory? Do I get sick through water I drink? Do I get sick through the food I eat? Do I get sick through the way I think? How does one get sick?
There's basically 4 mechanisms of getting sick. 1, injuries, right? You fall off a cliff and break your leg, that's a kind of sickness. Number 2, starvation. That's like scurvy, that's like beriberi, that's like pellagra. You don't have the nutrients, you don't have enough collagen, you don't have enough vitamin C, so that the tissues start to break down and they excrete these poisons to essentially try to detoxify. So number 1, injury. Number 2, starvation. And then 3, which is the biggest, is you're poisoned. So in other words, just like the milk example, you poison the milk, the bacteria come and eat the poison. And it's the same argument as if you think because the bacteria are there, they're the cause of the problem. That's like saying you go to a town and you see fires, and then you see firemen there, and so the firemen must be causing the fires. Actually, the firemen are there to clean up the fires and put out the fires out. The bacteria are there to biodegrade dead and dying tissue. So why is it dead and dying? Because it's been poisoned. With what? I mean, you want me to, each of us have 120 carcinogenic chemicals in our blood and urine, and all mother's milk does. We're exposed to electromagnetic fields, which we have 1,200 studies that show that they do harm. Glyphosate is in the air pollution, cyanide. There's lots of ways people are poisoned. And the final one is we have emotional toxicity or poisoning, or I sometimes say the way we think. Because if you think in this way that the world is out to get you, that instead of this, the world is a cooperative venture, that's really the model that I'm trying to bring here. The world is a cooperative venture. It's not this survival of the fittest model that was just a construct. Once you see it like that, that's the terrain theory. I have a healthy terrain and I'm resistant to sickness.
So 4 ways we get sick: injuries, starvation, which is scurvy, beriberi. This is when you're not getting enough nutrients, collagen. 3 is poison, similar to the story of the milk. And 4th one is emotional toxicity. The world is not out there to get you. It's a collaborative effort. And if you look at the world in a different way, you won't get sick. So if I were to ask you, when's the last time you got sick?
Patrick, let me just interrupt for a minute. Because when you look at, if you permit me, when you look at how we prove viruses are contagious or are pathogenic, that's not contagious. Let me change that word. So how does a modern virologist prove a virus is contagious? Let me go through the steps. So you take somebody who's sick, like your child with chickenpox, right? And you take some of the mucus from that child, and then you centrifuge it, which is not purification, right? So you have all kinds of cells and stuff in there, and you don't have a pure virus. And then you take that tissue and you take that stuff, right, the mucus, and you inoculate that on a tissue, like a monkey kidney cell, or a fetal skin cell, or an immortalized lung cancer cell, right? You take that unpurified stuff and you inoculate it on a tissue and see whether it grows and kills the tissue. You with me?
Sure.
Now it doesn't. And that was the problem of virology. So they figured out that they had to starve the tissue and poison it with antibiotics and oxidizing agents, and only then would the so-called virus kill the tissue. And that's how they prove that the viruses kill the tissue. And then they get this material from the breakdown of the tissue, and they say, see, the virus killed the tissue. And the reason I say that is because it's the exact same model as how we get sick. They starve and poison the tissue, just like we're starved and poisoned, and then we break down and create these particles, which are unfortunately called contagious viruses.
So what was your point of going where you just went right now when I was explaining the 4 reasons why you stated to me why people get sick? Why did you go there? I'm curious.
I went there because there's this interesting correlation between how virologists prove viral causation and the exact correlation with my theory, my proposal, with how human beings and animals get sick. Starvation and poison. That's how they make viruses kill cells.
So when's the last time you got sick?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
I don't remember.
Like it's been decades?
Well, not decades, years.
Okay. So you don't get sick?
I got sick every once in a while.
Interesting. And when you do get sick, are you the kind that's curious to find out how you got sick, or very rarely do you find out why you got sick?
It's very difficult in any one particular person to find out what the starvation or poisoning or inciting event was. Now, but that's what I spent my career trying to find out what happened to people.
Okay, so let's transition. Let's transition to a different topic here, and I hope all the doctors that listen to you, they probably learned. The rest of us, we may be lost right now. We were trying to track with you, but your level of the level you're explaining this stuff, I'm trying to get the viewers to understand to the simplest possible way. Let's talk about something we all deal with. Okay, let's talk about something that we all deal with, and maybe this will be a different angle we can take. Heart. We are told heart is genetics. It comes from your mom and dad. And, you know, every time I go to the doctor, they ask me a question, did your mom have a heart attack? No. How about your dad? My dad has 13 heart attacks. Really? Yes. How old was his first one? 44. How many has he had? 13. Has he had an open heart surgery? Yes. Does he have stents? Yes. 3 of them. How many angiograms? He's had 6 angiograms, 6 angioplastics. You got to be careful because you may have it, right? So what they don't know is my dad smoked cigarettes 2 packs a day for 30 years, and he drank a full glass of alcohol every single day for 30 years is what he did. I don't smoke, I don't drink. So what is the cause of heart disease and why heart attacks take place?
So, you know, we're going to have to go back.
Just remember 6th grade. 6th grade. Simplify it for us.
All right, I'll try my best, Patrick. First of all, we have to base every answer I give, I want it to be based on fact, right? Observations and fact. So fact number one, in 1920 in this country, there was almost no heart disease. Everybody acknowledges that. In fact, there's an interesting story that a guy invented the EKG at Harvard Medical School, offered it to the Harvard faculty, and they said, there's no use for this, there's no heart disease in this country. And whenever traditional indigenous people are studied, they have no evidence of heart disease. They have no evidence of dying of heart attacks. Now, I don't know about your concept of genetics, but we're talking 2 or 3 generations ago, we went from almost nobody having heart attacks. And by the way, if you look at a cookbook from 1920 and you say, what were the healthiest foods that people should eat? It was very clear: butter, lard, and eggs, and cream. Nobody had heart attacks. The fact that now in 1940, just 1 generation later, it became the #1 killer of Americans, there is no possible way that has anything to do with genetics.
See, now I got smarter, Tom. I'm telling you, what a difference it made in the first 45 minutes. And now I'm telling you, that was ridiculous. So 1920, no heart disease, just 2 or 3 generations ago in a 1920 cookbook, they're talking about butter, lard, and eggs. In 1940, a generation later, they're calling that the #1 killer. So who wrote the 1940 cookbooks and who made us think that these things kill us with heart attacks? And then when do we start having heart attacks?
We started having heart attacks with the 2 major things happened. One, the major change in the American diet, away from healthy fats and towards margarine, Crisco, and other processed foods. 3 things. The second thing was the widespread use of chemicals in agriculture and food and DDT and all the rest of it. And 3 was the increasing electrification of the earth, which we now know interferes with your ability to generate oxygen and to use oxygen. So as soon as those 3 things happen, you see this epidemic of heart disease. Now, here's another thing, Patrick. You know, if you ask 100 doctors, 100 lay people, 100 people off the street, why do people have heart attacks, right? They say the exact same thing. You have these 3 major coronary arteries. They carry all the blood to your heart. One of them gets blocked with plaque, or 2 of them, or 3 of them. The blood can't get through, and then you have a heart attack and die, right?
Sure.
Everybody knows that.
Yep.
You with me?
I'm with you. This part, I'm with you, 6th grade, fully qualified.
Got it. Okay. Now let's dissect this out a little bit. I've seen probably 100 people come to my office, say 50-year-old man. Let me stop for a minute here. Let me go back a little bit. So would you agree that if there's something blocking your arteries, it's probably in your blood?
Sure.
Right? Second question. Do you think the blood in your coronary arteries, the heart arteries, is the same blood as you have in your spleen and liver and foot and everywhere else?
I would assume so.
Yes, I would too.
Okay.
So the blood leading to your spleen has whatever it is that's causing the plaque, just like in the coronary arteries. So you must get plaque in your splenic artery as well, right?
Sure, yes.
Now, how many people have you heard of who've had spleen attacks?
I've never heard of spleen attacks.
So I have given lectures to maybe 50 to 100,000 people in my career. One of the questions, if I'm talking about heart, please raise your hand if you've heard of anybody or know of anybody who had a spleen attack, a liver attack, a foot attack, or a kidney attack. You know how many people raised their hands?
None.
None. Now, next question. How many of you know somebody personally or in the news who had a heart attack?
Plenty.
100%.
Sure.
How come? Same arteries, same blood, same plaque. How come? Next question. Guy comes to me. I've seen this probably 50 times, maybe 100 times, because I wrote a book about the heart. I have a medicine
Yeah.
for the heart. People come to me, 50-year-old guy. Doc, I walked up a hill. I felt a little pressure in my chest. I went to the doctor. He said, oh, you might have heart disease. We got to check your arteries, does an angiogram, says you have a 95% blockage. Usually they go like this. And if you block any more, you're going to die of a heart attack, right? I've heard that 100 times. Let's think about this for a minute. We're told that all the blood to your heart goes through those 3 arteries, right?
Sure.
That's why they unblock them. You, not you, but the guy who came to me,
The
you
50-year-old.
have 5% blood flow through your artery.
Okay.
How did you walk up that hill? Next question. You mean if you, not you, but that guy, you block from 5% to 3%, that's going to kill you? I don't believe it. 5% is no blood flow. 3%, 5%, exactly the same. There is no evidence that that makes any difference at all. Next thing, there was the biggest study ever done on people who died of heart attacks. They did it with autopsies. A guy named Giorgio Baroldi.
What year was it?
What?
What year was it?
2000 something.
So this is recent. It's not a 20s or 40s. It's a recent
No,
one.
this is
Okay.
2010, 13,
Okay.
12,
Got it.
I don't know. If you want to read the entire book, if you're a glutton for scientific punishment, go to heartattacknew.com. At the bottom, there's a print version. Baroldi prints the whole version, does autopsies 50 years on people who die of heart attacks. He says 41% of them have a blocked artery. And of that blockage, 50% come after the heart attack, not before. So if you do the math, that means that 80% of the heart attacks have no evidence of any blockage in the artery leading to that part of the heart. None. Now, when I wrote the book, I pointed that out and said, what is the reason why these other 80% die? And in fact, if you look at the studies of stents and bypasses, right? So these are mechanisms or strategies to clear out the arteries. If it was just a blockage, it should work. Every single one of them, the conclusion is there's no evidence that having a stent makes you live longer or not have a second heart attack. And then in October 2018, in the Lancet, for the first time, they did a blinded study of stents, right? So they took, I don't know how many, I think 70 people who had a single vessel blockage, right? Half of them, they put a stent in. The other half, they put a catheter in. They told them they put a stent in, but didn't. And they assessed them 8 weeks later. They had the exact same amount of chest pain. So now in the headlines of the article was stents proven useless. Now, it's therefore proven that stents don't prevent further heart attacks. They don't make you live longer, and they don't help you have less chest pain. And so it's very difficult to say, so what is the benefit? And I can't think of any. And in the article, they said, there must be something else that is causing people to have heart attacks. And essentially then the European Heart Association redid their typology of heart disease and said 60 to 80% of people who have heart disease, signs and symptoms, have no evidence of any plaque buildup. So essentially the whole plaque thing, at most it has to do with 20%. And the fact of the matter is most of the blood flow to our heart doesn't come from these arteries anyways. It is basically a watershed with millions of little capillaries, just like a watershed instead of a river. And when you have disease in how you generate energy, then you have a heart attack.
So what do you do now to prevent from having a heart attack? Like, you know, a basic question for you where somebody could apply right off the bat. When you order food, what foods do you absolutely avoid?
So I interpret questions, as you can see. You have to forgive me. So here's another way to ask that. Tom, should I read labels? Right? That's another way to ask that.
Sure.
Tom's answer, no. If it has a label, don't eat it.
If it
In
has
other
a
words,
label, don't eat it.
In other words, you go to the store or you go to a market or you go to a tree and you see that's an apple. You don't need a label. That's a fish. Or here's another way to say that. We know that the people in 1920 didn't have heart attacks. Eat what they ate. They had bacon and eggs for breakfast. The bacon was on pasture-raised pigs, because if you keep a pig in confinement, it will become toxic, and then it will, quote, get infected, just
But
like
that's
I
helpful
said
right there. What you just said is helpful. Pasture-raised pigs.
Right.
Right.
Pasture-raised pigs, cows that are on pasture, so
Okay.
that they have all the healthy nutrients, and then freshly ground wheat that you bake into sourdough bread, and vegetables from your garden. And if it has a label, don't eat it. And I didn't say don't eat processed food, because like making bacon is processed food, or eating sauerkraut. And here's another thing, Patrick. If you go back to your traditional Iranian diet from 2 generations ago, number one, they didn't have heart disease. Number two, they probably lived long, healthy lives. And number three, they ate exactly what I described.
I think I'm going to move into that forest right behind you and learn how to hunt and just live there. That's why I forget about this business stuff. I don't know what I'm putting myself through, Doc. I might just go and live in the forest, learn how to hunt, live like they lived before, and live a couple hundred years.
You don't have to do that. All you have to do is go get Nourishing Traditions and get my heart book and follow the guidelines.
Fair enough. So we'll do that, and we'll put the link below. Also, we'll put the link below to the article you asked for, you suggested with the gentleman on the bottom of that website. We'll put that link below as well. That was very helpful. Here's the next question for you. Recently, a lot of my friends, wives specifically, are telling me they're having a lot of vertigo and they're getting dizzy, okay? And this isn't just one or two. I'm talking like these are close friends of mine. They're all executives and successful business people. And they're saying, I'm getting vertigo. I'm getting dizzy. I've never had vertigo. I don't know why I'm getting dizzy. Then they go to the doctor and the doctor tells them, hold your head, the whole exercise, what you need to do and do this and do that. And one of them went to another doctor in Idaho, I believe. And the doctor came back and said, there's a couple things that's going on. It's called electrosensitivity. I'm sure you've heard of electrosensitivity. And BBC even did an article on this saying, I didn't believe people had it. And then it happened to me, which is, folks who are feeling certain things, diagnosis based on 5G. This is a BBC article saying, I didn't believe it. People had it. Then it happened to me. Close, fatigue, pain, headaches, dizziness, burning, twitching, nausea, palpitations, just some of the symptoms experienced by people who say they suffer from electrosensitivity. These are most self-diagnosed, years of, anyways, on the bottom it says the World Health Organization says electrosensitivity is not a medical diagnosis, and both the World Health Organization and Public Health England say there's no scientific basis that these symptoms are linked to electromagnetic field exposure such as 5G. You hear some people say yes, you hear some people say no. What are your thoughts of any linkage between this vertigo and dizziness and 5G towers being put up in different places?
Vertigo and dizziness has been a symptom of electromagnetic field poisoning for at least 120 years. Every time there's an increase in the electrical activity on the earth, millions of people get vertigo, dizziness, lightheadedness, and there's a very clear reason for that, which basically goes into the water, which I think is probably going to be too technical, but it basically destructures the water. We have very clear evidence of this, and that creates the experience of altered electrical activity, because after all, we're electrical beings. And anybody who says, oh, there's no evidence that we're electrical beings, I just say, have you ever heard of an EKG or an EEG? These are measuring electrical wavelengths in your brain and your heart. And you can also demonstrate that you can have abnormal electrical activity by an EEG with exposure to cell phones. You can do a mitigation device, and so you can mitigate that, and the abnormal electrical activity will go away, and the vertigo and dizziness will be gone. The World Health Organization is wrong. There's approximately 1,200 peer-reviewed studies in the literature documenting the health consequence of exposure to electromagnetic fields.
Doc,
anybody who says otherwise is simply not aware of the science.
Two questions for you. One, what is a mitigation device that you said could prevent that from happening?
There's a number of them. There's one system called biogeometry, and there's another system that uses scalar waves, which basically, you know, the problem with electromagnetic fields, if I could put it in context,
please,
is humans evolved to experience and utilize the electromagnetic energy of the sun and the moon and the earth and plants and rocks and minerals and water and every living thing. That is the energy of life. And it's all in this pattern that's very sort of chaotic. It's not one wavelength over and over and over again. In fact, if you do a measurement of the sun, you get no pulsations. It's just a continuous sheet of a variety of electromagnetic fields. I don't know if this is too complicated, but.
A little bit complicated, but I'm trying to up my intelligence, so keep going.
Okay, so that's normal. And then you say, I want to use a frequency to have an effect, like a radio. So I don't want all of these frequencies. I just want 98.6. So one frequency, and so you get a frequency, boop, 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 boop. And you make it intense so that somebody can pick it up with a receiver. Now, the problem is that's functional, and then we have sound called a radio or a radar or millimeter waves or wireless devices. They all work on these very consistent high intensity frequencies. The problem is they're toxic to the tissues, all of them, because this is not something that human beings or any living thing has ever been exposed to. And so it creates a defensive response, which is to change the electrical activity. Hence, you experience that as vertigo and dizziness. That's an electrical activity. The nerves are electrical devices, so to speak. So you poison the electrical mechanism of a human being, and then your experience of that is vertigo. Now, so that's the problem.
But what's the solution?
Well, the solution, there's one of two. One is don't do that, right? If we're meant to live with non-pulsating, high-intensity frequency waves, then it seems a little crazy to keep doing that over and over again and expect that we're going to get away with it. So that's one solution. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, people don't like that solution.
Sure.
They don't want to do that. So there are people who are looking at creating interference patterns, or this actually works through the water in your tissues. So if you strengthen the water, it will be more resistant to that. That's the terrain. If you allow these fields to poison the water, they break down, the bacteria eat it, they excrete viruses, and then you think you have an infection. So I don't want to get into naming a product here, because I'm not here to sell products.
No, you don't need to name a product, but what I'm asking you is, are there products for people to use who are dealing with vertigo and dizziness due to electrosensitivities? And if yes, is that something that's over the counter that I can find?
Yes.
Okay. Is there something they call it? Not even a brand. Is there something they call it or no?
Well, one method, it's a method, is biogeometry. That's one method.
Okay.
And another is to use scalar waves. Now,
Scalar waves. Okay.
there's
Well, I mean,
different, it's basically just putting an interference pattern into your surrounding atmosphere.
if somebody searches those two things, can they find it out for themselves? If this is because the people that are calling me, this is really bothering them a lot. If they wanted to do research, is this something easily to be found? The biogeometry and the scalar waves.
Yes, but I would, again, Patrick, I'm not going to get into endorsing products here.
I'm not saying that. What all I'm asking you is, if I go research it, is it easy for me to find it, to go use some of the process that's out there? Is it easy to find for myself?
Yes, but you may end up getting something that doesn't work. Because there's scalar waves, and then there's people who really know how to do it. Just like everything in the world. There's apples, and then there's really good apples. And there's meat, and there's really good meat. And
is there a way to differentiate between the BS and the real product to use, or whatever waves it is to use?
So here I'm going to get a little self-serving. And so people have to understand that I have spent 35 to 40 years researching this and using it with my thousands of patients to see what works, because I can't afford to use things that don't work, right? That's my career.
Okay.
So we wrote about them in the book.
Okay. All right. Then which book is it in, by the way? Is it
the Contagion Myth?
Contagion Myth, which is coming out September 29th. Okay. As long as it's in there, there's nothing wrong with putting a plug into your book, by the way. That's good to go. Okay, that was very helpful. Let's go to the next topic. This was actually very helpful. Next topic, stem cells. Okay, what you're seeing happening a lot is a lot of people are starting to talk about stem cells. And what I mean by, I live in Dallas, okay? Somebody has a back problem, somebody has knee problems, joints, shoulder. They'll tell you, go get stem cell shots, and 35 million stem cells or whatever these procedures cost between $10,000 to $40,000, depending on what kind of stem cell. Is it your own? Is it somebody else? Is it from bone marrow? Is it, how much research have you done on stem cells, and how much credence or credibility do you give to the fact that these stem cell shots can really help somebody heal and even feel younger?
So I am not an expert on stem cells, so I really don't even want to comment on that. But one of the reasons is because I think that the whole conception of what osteoarthritis or joint disease is incorrect. And so for me, there was essentially no reason to need to use stem cells. Because once one understands why somebody has an arthritic joint, then you can resolve the problem without having to resort to $5 million worth of stem cells, which, you know, again, I haven't looked into it enough to know.
Okay,
so
fair enough. I think that's good. Let me ask another one. I mean, if you don't have an opinion on these things, we'll just skip them. You can just say, Pat, I don't have any opinion on this.
I have an opinion, but Pat, I have an opinion on arthritis, and I have a treatment and a conception of how somebody can heal from arthritis so that they don't need to spend money on stem cells.
I'd love to hear, because people, look, my dad has arthritis. I know a lot of people that have arthritis, and it's a very annoying thing to have. So if you don't mind taking a minute, I'm sure some people would like to hear it.
So, and again, with everything with me is you have to understand the basics. And I can sense that it's getting a little annoying.
No, I kind of know where you're going to go now. Observation, fact. So please lead the way with observation and fact.
Okay, so what is a joint? A joint is a bone, and then it has a structured water encasement that we call a bursa, and there's two bursas that oppose each other, right? That's what we call a joint. Now, if you look into the science of structured water, you find that all structured water is negatively charged, and so what happens in a joint is you have these two negatively charged jello structures that, because they're negatively charged, they oppose each other and repel each other and create smooth movement of the joint, right? That's a normal joint. Now, what happens is if you destructure the water, in other words, make it into more liquid water instead of jello water, it A, loses its charge, and B, loses its ability to repel each other, and gradually gets worn away more and more until you have bone on bone, and then you have to get a knee replacement. The problem is the loss of structure of the gels surrounding your knees. So then you have to say, how do we make gels in the first place? The same, the same way we make Jell-O. You take proteins, in this case collagen, you take healthy, unpolluted water.
I got to tell you, I've never had a doctor recommend that eating more Jell-O is good for you, but I'm glad you were able to do that. I'm sure a lot of us are excited about that.
Yeah, it's not Jell-O because Jell-O has all kinds of stuff in it. I'm talking about collagen proteins.
I'm giving you a hard time.
Vitamin C, and you stop poisoning the structure of the water. It can form properly, and then you're fine. And that's how I did medicine. And see, for some people, this is theory. You know, for me, I had to figure out a way to help people rebuild their knee because they were in pain and they didn't like it, and I didn't want to give them drugs. And interestingly, the anti-inflammatory, the inflammation is how you remodel the joint. And if you use anti-inflammatories like Advil or Aleve, we know that it makes the joint worse. It also destructures your Jell-O. So I was about recreating the healthy conditions for your joint. And then I have people say, yeah, now my knee doesn't hurt anymore. And they didn't have to get stem cells, and they didn't have to get a knee replacement. And they stopped poisoning, you know, again, electromagnetic fields destructure your gels. And that's another reason why you don't have a healthy knee.
Okay, let's go to the next topic. That was good. That was helpful. Here's the next one, since we have you here. I read a book called Ageless Man. Ageless Man. And the author in this book talks about the fact that as man ages, when their testosterone level drops, their temper goes higher, their bitterness goes higher, they can't conduct in the same old methods they used to in the bedroom when they used to make movies in the bedroom. Now they can barely make a short film. You know, their joints hurt, their body hurts, and because testosterone levels are low, many different ways, they're not benefiting from that. So you see a lot of people out there nowadays, not doctors, but I'm hearing this a lot. I'm curious to know what you say about this. I've had a lot of bodybuilders on, but you hear a lot of people saying testosterone replacement, meaning a form of taking some kind of steroids or some kind of growth hormone when you get past the age of 40 or 50, can actually help you live a longer life where you become ageless, okay? Now, I'm curious to know, somehow I have an idea what direction you're going to go with your answer, but I'm curious to know what you have to say regarding some form of steroids to increase your testosterone level. What are your thoughts on that?
So again, I can't answer. I mean, I could say that's not what I do, but that doesn't help anybody. I think it would be better if I explain why I don't like that approach. Is that okay?
Sure.
So the problem is, what's the therapy and what's the disease? And here's the situation. Because of a whole variety of things, maybe just including aging, but poisoning and starvation and the rest, your tissues are breaking down. And you experience that as dysfunction, right? And you can't perform in the bedroom, you don't feel as good, you're irritable, etc. Now, there's two ways of understanding this. One of the things that deteriorates is your testosterone, and so that's the disease, right? Here's another way of understanding it. You have crappy tissue, and so because my body is smarter than you are, it's going to lower the testosterone to protect you from hurting yourself, because you're in no shape to go, you know, do anything, because you don't have good joints. Your body is deteriorating. So I'm going to lower your testosterone level to protect you. And the question is, which one of those two is correct? Because I think what's happening is your body is lowering the testosterone as a protective mechanism to keep you from hurting yourself. Now, the reason I think that's true is I take that person who's falling apart and I say, look, Pat, stop falling apart. Feed yourself good food, get out of the Wi-Fi, stop poisoning yourself, and you know what happens? Your testosterone levels go up. Why? Now we're good. Now I'm not so worried about hurting yourself. And so I self-regulate. And the problem is if you start giving somebody testosterone, they become an addict because they then down-regulate and they make less and less. And then if you ever stop because you give them cancer or something, they are screwed big time. And so my way is honoring the wisdom of the body, saying this is not a disease, this is a strategy, it's a protective response to the fact that you're just not taking care of yourself. You're eating crappy food, your joints are deteriorating. If I were you, I would lower your testosterone too. Keep you from hurting yourself.
Gosh, so I would lower your testosterone too. Keep you from hurting yourself. What do you mean lower my testosterone level to keep me from hurting myself?
So I just said, so you have this, you haven't,
you want men's marriage to not work out? How many more divorces do you want to see? I mean, what's
no, Pat, you got that wrong.
You're killing me here, Tom. We got some men, we want to keep these guys married. I don't want our audience to get 92 divorces tomorrow and blame me for it.
But Pat, what I said was you will end up with higher testosterone.
So a Wi-Fi diet is what I need, is what you're saying.
No, what you need to do is if you deteriorate, right? Because you're not feeding yourself, you're not living as you should, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then your body is it's the same reason why women who starve, young women who starve themselves, they lose their periods. That's not a disease, that's protecting them from getting pregnant because they don't have the nourishment and the health to carry a healthy baby.
Very interesting analogy,
so
yes.
If you're a sick guy because you're not, eating right and living right,
yeah,
you lower your hormone levels. Now, I didn't say to keep lowering them. I said, if you nourish yourself, your body will naturally raise the testosterone level, and then you will have a healthy marriage and a healthy life and all those things you said. So you can't blame me for the divorce because I gave you a very specific way of raising it without doing anything except working with how your body actually functions.
Okay, fine. Okay, let's go a little deeper on this topic, but in a different angle. So I think it's fair to say that I'm never going to see about you winning Mr. Olympia bodybuilding champion. Is that a fair assessment?
Wait, say that again?
Is it fair to say that you will never win a bodybuilding contest? Is that a fair assessment?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
I just want to make sure. I want to go based on facts and observations is what I want to do. I want to respect you. So let me ask you this. When I was in my 20s, I could eat a burger or I could eat a cheese, a pizza and nothing would happen to me. The moment I turned 30, that same pizza I ate, I felt a little bit heavier, right? In my 30s, I was still pretty flexible. And then when I hit 40, my flexibility wasn't the same as it was in my 30s. I could still do the splits until 28, 29. I can't do the splits, obviously, today at 41. But when I go do my yoga classes, it's not the same. When I talk to people in their 50s, they say you may pay a visit to the doctor to ask him about Cialis or what's the other one? Cialis or give me a break. It's the other famous one. It's
Viagra.
Cialis or Viagra. So what is there a natural Cialis or Viagra? You seem like somebody that would know the answer to that question. There's a lot of people that would want to know the answer to a natural method of increasing my testosterone level to bring out the Ron Jeremy-esque of mine in the bedroom.
It's very simple, Patrick, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the Native Americans had a very good formula for this. Number one, they ate healthy fats, they moved around a lot, and they ate the organ meats of the buffalo, particularly the testes and the adrenal gland. And the problem is the lowering of your sex drive, the lowering of your libido is your body saying, Pat, if you're going to poison yourself and starve yourself your whole life, I'm going to not have you make babies because you're too dumb to do that. So the mechanism is lower your testosterone.
What a way of looking at it, though. Let me tell you, that's very interesting way of looking at it on what you're saying right there.
It's accurate. And the reason I know it's accurate is I tell, okay, you come to me, or you did, and I say, Patrick, stop doing those. Eat the way that people supposed to eat. Take care of your water. Eat some, organ preparations. I'll tell you where to get them. And your sex drive and all these things and flexibility will come back. And you didn't have to take any drugs and poison yourself worse. And this is not a theory, Patrick. This is what I've been doing for 35 years.
So where do
I had to be successful.
Where do I get some high quality buffalo balls?
I mean, I could tell you the product, but I didn't want to come here and sound like I'm selling anybody any product. But I have spent 35 years trying to find out who knows how to make buffalo balls, and I found out.
So you're going to reveal it, or is it a secret that you're just going to keep for you and your family? I mean, this
go
I'm sure you've shared it with Joseph, your son. What is the buffalo ball formula here?
Go to drtomcowan.com. You'll see a formula called male optimization.
A bunch of secrets with you, let me tell you. Oh my gosh.
It's not secret. I don't want to, I'm here to help people with information.
Can you give us we're going to go to the website. We're going to put the link below. Can you give us a glimpse for people that are here to give them an idea? They're still going to go to your site. We'll drive them to it. Is there any hints you can give us?
About what?
About this buffalo balls, like where we can get them.
It's called male optimization formula.
So is it a medicine I would take, or I would go to a store to buy it?
You can get it on our website.
Okay. All right. So we'll drive it to your website as well. When you combine marketing and doctor and research, you find yourself a Dr. Tom Cowan. So it's a very, very interesting combination right there. The rest of us are trying to figure out marketing. You already have it down. So final thoughts here before we wrap up is coronavirus. We're seeing cases coming down. We're seeing deaths coming down. We're seeing numbers are looking better. We're seeing, election year that's coming up. And a lot of people are right now talking about vaccines. And, President Trump is talking about how he's shooting to have a vaccine available by, November 1st. You're seeing some people that are not confident about it. They're not comfortable about it. We haven't yet talked anything about COVID. What are your thoughts with COVID and coronavirus, what's taking place there? And when the vaccine does come out, are you someone that trusts taking a vaccine, or there's no way in the world you're going to touch a vaccine?
So given that we're basically at the end of our time, for me to get into the whole coronavirus thing now, I think would be a little bit out of context. Let me just say that we wrote a whole book about this, and we go through the science of whether there's evidence that COVID-19 is caused by coronavirus. All I will say is we present the evidence in the book that there is no possible way that COVID-19 is caused by this coronavirus. All of the tests are meaningless. All of the numbers are meaningless. Any vaccine for a coronavirus can't possibly be true or valid, because until it's proven that COVID-19 is caused by this virus, which it hasn't been, and I know that for a fact, and anybody who wants to go into the details should read our book, The Contagion Myth. So all these questions are essentially moot about cases. There's no test that shows, reliably whether there's a case or not. And I don't expect anybody to believe that. All I want them to do is look at the evidence. We lay out the evidence in the book, and I think the evidence will stand for itself.
I think that's a good way to wrap up the interview. We're going to put the link below to your latest book that's coming out September 29, 2020. Depending on when you watch it, you can go in the description and order the book for yourself. Dr. Tom Cowan, thank you so much for your time. I've enjoyed it. We started off in the interview at the beginning extremely technical. We went then speaking to 6th graders, and then we finished speaking to 6-year-olds, and then we finished speaking to 50-year-olds. So I think we've covered it all. We've spoken to educated people, business people, salespeople, younger people, everybody. Someone's going to get something out of this interview. And again, thank you for making the time to be a guest on Valuetainment.
All right, Patrick, take care. It was good to meet you and talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you. So we have a lot of different types of guests, but this doctor had a different approach to the way he viewed heart disease, germs. I mean, even ED that we talked about, testosterone, stem cells, was very interesting. Curious to know what you took away from it. If you want to comment below, if you enjoyed this interview and never seen the debate that I had between Alan Dershowitz and Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy Jr. over the topic of vaccines, click over here to watch that. And if you've not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.